Hi, I'm Phil Mason here in the UK with Vasily Nevlev. We're going to be watching a pre-recorded session that Vasily has made about an introduction to Azure Kubernetes Service and SAS Viya 2020. Once the recording completes, then Vasily will be answering your questions that you can submit in the chat window on YouTube. So let's get started.
Hello everyone, my name is Vasily Nevlev. I'm a director with Analytium Group, UK-based SaaS and Microsoft consultancy. I've been working with SaaS in various industries for the last 10 years. And this session, I would like to offer you a brief introduction to Azure Kubernetes Service and SAS Viya 2020.1. This session is aimed at beginners, someone who isn't sure what Kubernetes, Docker, or AKS means. I hope by the end of the session, you will be equipped with the basic terminology and understanding to make sense of the technical deployment documentation. Many users no doubt are joining this presentation because they would like to know what is Kubernetes and what impact it has on SaaS software. Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration software. Here's I'm confusing things, and you now might be asking, so what is a container? And I will cover that in the next slide. What is important to understand at this point, Kubernetes doesn't care what software is run within containers. The name Kubernetes originates from Greek, meaning helmsman or pilot, and it's used to coordinate and monitor Docker containers. So Kubernetes orchestrates and arranges Docker containers. But what is a Docker container? Here is a community definition. Container is a standard unit of software that packages up code and all the dependencies so the application can run quickly and reliably from one computing environment to another. Containers have three important characteristics. Containers introduce a standard for portable software. Containers are typically lightweight because they share the machine's operating system kernel and therefore do not require additional operating system like virtual machines, for example. Containers are secure. As an example of Docker, provides a complete isolation of resources and access between containers, so you can run multiple applications within multiple containers on a single virtual host, and either of the containers or users accessing those applications will not be able to interact with each other. Now that you might have a basic idea of what is Docker and Kubernetes, you might ask yourself, why would you want to use Kubernetes for the software? It provides three key benefits: velocity, scaling, and efficiency. Velocity is the speed of being able to orchestrate the software components, deploy the software, and make changes effective. Scaling of people and systems is another important benefit. You can quickly and easily extend your Kubernetes deployment horizontally and vertically. And since the software is modular, the teams supporting them can also be quickly and easily scaled. Kubernetes and Docker almost completely abstract the infrastructure, which makes the portability of the software much easier to achieve. No longer you need to reinstall SaaS components when the server release finishes. Efficiency is the third factor. Because developers no longer think in terms of machines, their applications can be collocated on the same machines without impacting the applications themselves. This means that tasks from multiple users can be packaged tightly onto fewer machines. Efficiency can be measured by the ratio of useful work performed by the machines. I personally feel velocity is having one of the biggest impacts on the SAS Viya 2020.1. SAS Institute, like other vendors, moved from distributing the software on CDs and DVDs towards a fully electronic distribution. With Kubernetes, the updated software can be quickly and easily installed. It's simply a matter of replacing one container image with another, and then request a Kubernetes cluster to make the change effective. Because of that, the SAS Institute has now introduced continuous delivery for SAS Viya, where the new features are going to be released frequently and can be adopted by customers in production without often bringing the software down for the update. I would highly recommend you to attend the SAS session for the new SAS Viya version convention, as these are now directly related to the cadence of software releases. Azure Kubernetes Service is a Kubernetes as a service offering from Microsoft for Azure customers. Within a single Azure service, you are able to order infrastructure, benefit from supporting services such as Docker registries, and have access to the full ecosystem of tools that allow you to build, deploy, and monitor your applications like SAS Viya 2020.1. All of that is available on a flexible pricing model where you're paying only for the resources used. A few more Kubernetes terms are necessary to explain the next several slides. Kubernetes cluster is a set of machines running containerized applications. Each machine is referred as a node, which can be a physical or virtual machine. A node can vary in size and location, and the nodes in the cluster are independent from each other. The nodes can be located in multiple data centers, making your cluster geographically resilient or highly available, although you have to architect your high availability carefully to minimize impact on performance. Another important term is the node pools. Node pools are collections of nodes for certain types of workloads. For example, SAS recommends separate node pools for CAS because CAS workload benefits greatly from a very high RAM to CPU ratio, while stateless node pools is used for microservices and other components that require lower RAM to CPU access. Typical SAS Viya 2020.1 has several other types of node pools, such as system and ops for Viya services. We will cover them later. So what exactly is being containerized within SAS Viya 2020.1? SAS consists of a range of components and services. These are analytical engines, such as MAS, CAS, compute server, and also infrastructure service, such as SAS cache server, configuration, and infrastructure data service. The service and services highlighted in purple or yellow require some data persistence. But what that means is that the services need to create and later use data for internal functioning of the software. Here is another graphical perspective on the SAS Viya 2020.1. Big thanks goes to SAS for sharing it. The diagram shows the typical deployment of Kubernetes cluster and the Docker containers within it. All components and services within the blue areas are deployed within Kubernetes. If you are seeing SAS Viya architecture for the first time, let me walk you through it. You have one of three ways of connecting to SAS Viya. One of it, and the main one, is through the microservices using SAS microservices. This what users experience when they connect to SAS Visual Analytics, for example. Another way of connecting to SAS is via the SAS compute server. It's this component here. Enterprise Guide, for example, when connecting to SAS Viya, is connecting via SAS compute server. And at last but not least, CAS clients use TCP/IP to connect directly to CAS. These components typically are running within their own individual containers, making the deployment portable and easy to upgrade. It's also perfectly possible to upgrade a version of a single microservice by swapping the containers. Alongside of microservices, SAS and CAS clusters, you can also find a collection of support services for collecting the metrics, log aggregation, health monitoring, and registry. And of course, you also have individual containers for RabbitMQ, Postgres, if been deployed internally, and a version of console. Here is a graphical representation of what SAS Viya 2020.1 deployment might look like on an Azure AKS. Starting from the top left, you have a Bastion host or jump box in a separate subnet, called here Subnet 1. Our Kubernetes cluster, which is this whole box here, is deployed in a subnet 2. The cluster itself is made out of 5 separate node pools. The purpose of the pools is to keep containers that share the same purpose, running on the same type of nodes. For example, CAS, like I already mentioned, benefits greatly from having a high ratio of RAM to CPU. It's this CAS over here. In this example, this would be the same for SMP and MPP deployment. Another one, web applications and microservices stateless pool here. We also have compute services for processing the workload, such as a batch process, for example. And we have supporting ones, such as system node pool that are required for correct functioning of Kubernetes. And we have ops for Viya, which includes the monitoring and logging components, such as Prometheus, Grafana, Elastic, and Kibana. Viya can also be configured to incorporate Azure Container Registry over here, Active Directory for user authentication, and the Azure for database for PostgreSQL. This can be installed internal and can also be used external as a service. It's important to note that these components do not require containers because these are software as a service and they do not require any deployment, although you might need to configure your subnet in such a way that your instance can access these services. Let's recap what's been covered. Kubernetes is used to orchestrate the Docker containers. Docker containers is a way to create and deploy software without worrying too much about the infrastructure. Azure Kubernetes Service is a service on Azure to obtain Kubernetes clusters with infrastructure and support services included. SAS Viya 2020.1 works only on AKS at the moment, offering continuous update and deployment process. A few gotchas for you to keep in mind. SAS Viya 2020.1 is evolving very fast, with the new features being released every month. If you are looking into deploying your first SAS Viya 2020.1, keep in mind that it supports AKS version 1.18 and only Docker runtime at this point. Your ingress service must be in Jinx, and SAS Viya doesn't support dynamic scaling of CAS just yet. If you require high availability, keep in mind that Azure default behavior is to spread Kubernetes cluster across 2 availability zones, but the shared disk storage that should be claimable by some of the Docker containers can be attached across availability zones. This is due to how Azure works, and it's not a SAS Viya limitation. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section. If you're watching the recording, feel free to send the questions to me by email. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Vasily, for that presentation. It was very interesting. I just want to point out to people who are watching live on YouTube at the moment that if you have any questions about that, any of the aspects that you've just seen, you can ask those questions in the chat, and we'll pick them up in the next 10 minutes or so, or perhaps a little bit longer, depending on the number of questions, and we'll see if Vasily can answer them. But let's start by looking at some questions I have already. Now, Vasily, you said that SAS Viya is evolving very fast. What are the latest changes that are relevant to your video?
First of all, Phil, thank you very much for having me on. And you're right, Viya evolving very fast in the cloud. There are many changes coming in very fast. For example, support for multiple clouds. One of the notable ones is Redshift, OpenShift, Red Hat OpenShift that coming in. Support for multiple Kubernetes engines also coming in very soon. And of course, SAS is constantly releasing new features. One of the recent features that was released on Viya is the support for chatbots, both the design and implementation.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Now we just had a question in the chat from Odesh. He was saying Azure AD, is that being used with AKS?
Yes, so AKS stands for Azure Kubernetes Service, and Azure AD is one of the services that Azure provides, and that's for authentication. Within Viya itself, you can hook it up onto Azure AD, and it doesn't have to be Viya 4. Viya 3.5 also supports Azure AD. You could either go through another proxy service like ADDS on Azure, or you could go directly with the authentication against Azure AD, but you will need to take care of your Linux machines through another provider.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, thanks. Now also, Vasily, what types of VM should be used for the various types of node pools?
It's good that you asked that. In fact, one of the recent research exercise that we did at Analytium, we tested over 100 of different VMs for execution of SAS-based code. Of course, with Viya, you need to think about all the various components that you need to take care. And I could tell you that for CAS, you need to be looking at machines with a significant amount of RAM memory. So there are different VM types available on Azure that provides you that. one of the recent clients that we had to put some of the VMs up to 800 gigabytes of RAM on each of the VM. And that's because how memory intensive their processing is. Now the cache needs a lot of RAM, but if for this pre-processing, so if you're planning to execute a lot of SAS base code on your Viya, then you should seriously consider investing into DC instances, which is a sub-series of D series. These provide fewer cores, but really high throughput on each individual core. As a result, the SAS base code executes faster than on a typical machines like a E-type or D-type in Azure. So the best way is to look at exactly what you're trying to do on a SAS Viya, what kind of workloads you're going to be handling, amount of data that you want to visualize, number of users, and then pick the VMs that best fit your specific profile.
Okay, thanks for that. There's another question from the chat from Michael. He says, it sounds like Viya 2020 is a substantial change from Viya 3.5. And there were two parts to his question. Is there an upgrade path for going from 3.5, say on Linux, to Viya 2020? And also, are you able to deploy Viya 2020 on premises?
At this point in time, you cannot deploy Viya 2020 on-premise. In the future, you will be able to do a hybrid cloud deployment with OpenShift, and OpenShift is available on-premise. And that means that you will be able, as long as you have OpenShift on-premise, to deploy that. The Viya cannot be deployed on other in-house clouds supported by VMware or Nutanix, for example. That's not supported, and I haven't seen it on a roadmap to be supported in the future. Now, when it comes to upgrade, there are two sides to the upgrade, the way you have it. One, you cannot upgrade in place because Viya 3.5, the latest version of Viya 3, does not run on AKS. It can be Kubernetes, but that's only programming only interface that can be done that. So the best and pretty much the only upgrade path that we would seriously consider is simply promote your content from Viya 3.5 to Viya 2020. You do the promotion in a very similar way, the way you would do it if you had two Viya 3.5 environments standing next to each other, which many customers do have it because usually one is designated as development, another one test and production. In the same way, you could promote the content to Viya 2020. Does that answer the question?
Thanks for that. I think so. Now that we had another question in the chat from Juan. He was asking you to explain a bit more about, there was a statement about CAS not being able to scale in this context. Like, can you explain anything more about that?
Mm-hmm. So we are specifically talking about the auto scaling of some of the cast nodes. And at this point in time, at the time of the presentation, it wasn't available, but I believe it will be available soon, although I can't tell you exactly when. And that's talking about certain types of scaling of the cast nodes within that. I must say, on the other side, the scaling is now rapidly becoming made available from the Azure side to be able to downsize the clusters to 0. And that's a feature that's not coming from SAS, but coming from the Microsoft itself. It's only recently, only about 2 months ago or so, it went into the public preview, or maybe now even general availability, that the clusters can be downsized to 0. So again, there is a very close step-in-step technology handshake between SAS and Azure.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we got some good comments in there, like people saying perfect answer and things like this in the chat. So I think you've really answered the questions there. Perhaps one last question. I'm just wondering, what's next for Viya 4? Do you have any thoughts on that?
The best way would be to go and visit the Innovation Hub at SAS Global Forum, and you could see various examples of where the Viya 4 is heading. There's a lot of happening in the industry at the moment. Support for various types of data sources. I've seen some interesting news about a strategic alliance between a new startup called Single Store and SAS. I would really like to see what that is coming to be. That seems to be a new way of storing and processing data, and they now have a partnership that they declared with SAS. There is a
new web applications constantly being added. Recently, a data catalog feature came out on the SAS Viya 4, and that allows you to discover the data and classify the data in many cases in an automated way. You could create the maps and you can cast a net against all your data sources and be able to say what is stored where and how sensitive it is and process the data accordingly. Many other applications are being moved onto Viya 4. There is a roadmap for SAS Studio to be able to import SAS Enterprise Guide projects onto that and directly import into that and convert them on the fly. There is a support plan for some of the data management features, so the customers could migrate away from Data Integration Studio onto Viya 4 and also similar to a native experience way. Visual Investigator, another great application that is on the roadmap to be migrated to SAS Viya 4 in the near future.
Well, sounds like a lot of great stuff coming up in the near future. Yeah, it's really exciting times. Well, I think we're just about out of time now, so I just want to say thank you very much for that presentation and for doing the Q&A, adding so much to the presentation through that as well. It's been really good to hear this introduction to Azure Kubernetes Service and SAS Viya 2020. So thank you, Vasily, for that.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
And yeah, lastly, I just want to say to the people watching this, we hope you'll continue to explore all the other great content that is available on the SAS Global Forum users YouTube channel. There's a lot there already, and there's a lot more to come. And also, don't forget to take the session survey on the Global Forum Attendees Hub, because it's really good to have feedback about these sessions. And yeah, it's really useful to the planners and also to Vasily just to get some feedback about his talk. So thanks very much for all that.